Red spray paint glistened on my white garage door. "We warned you," in angry, dripping letters. Diane Mercer stood before it in her formal business attire, spray can still in hand, shouting about compliance and consequences. I stepped out and faced her, arms crossed firmly against my chest, my expression calm but unyielding. She had no idea she'd just vandalized a federal agent's home. No idea that her reign of HOA terror was about to meet the full force of federal justice. What happens when neighborhood tyrants pick the wrong house to intimidate? After 15 years with the FBI's Public Corruption and Civil Rights Division, I'd taken early retirement at 42 to enjoy the peaceful surroundings of Oak Ridge Estates. The property listing explicitly stated no HOA restrictions, a requirement for me after witnessing countless cases of neighborhood governance gone wrong. My attorney verified this before I signed the closing papers on the ranch-style corner lot with mature oak trees and southern exposure. 3 days after moving in, a pearl-white Lexus parked in my driveway. Diane Mercer emerged, mid-30s, ambitious, and impeccably dressed in a designer suit that seemed excessive for a neighborhood visit. Her practiced smile never reached her calculating eyes, a telltale sign I documented in hundreds of interrogation reports during my FBI career. "Welcome to Oak Ridge," she announced, extending a leather portfolio emblazoned with gold lettering. "Your HOA registration materials. The $750 initiation fee is due immediately, with $225 monthly dues beginning next week." I reviewed the documents carefully. There must be a mistake. My property is exempt from HOA governance according to county records and my deed. Her smile tightened infinitesimally, another behavior I documented countless times in subjects attempting to maintain composure when challenged. "That exemption expired upon ownership transfer," she stated with rehearsed confidence. "Our board amended the bylaws last year. Everyone contributes to maintaining our standards now. Everyone." The implied threat in her final word didn't escape me. I'd built my career recognizing intimidation tactics, however subtly delivered. "I'll need to verify that with county records," I replied evenly. "Legal changes to property covenants require proper notification and recording." Her expression hardened. "I assure you everything is properly filed. We run a tight operation here in Oak Ridge." As she turned to leave, she added casually, "By the way, your garden beds don't meet our approved layout specifications. You'll want to address that before our compliance committee meeting next Tuesday." I watched her drive away, recognizing the opening move in a game I'd seen played dozens of times in my professional life. Never once had I expected to become a target myself. That evening, I contacted an old colleague at the county recorder's office. By morning, I had confirmation. My property remained legally exempt from HOA jurisdiction. The supposed amendment had never been properly filed or approved. I didn't immediately confront Diane with this information. 23 years in federal investigations had taught me the value of gathering evidence before revealing your position. Instead, I began documenting everything. I installed military-grade security cameras with night vision capabilities covering every approach to my property. I recorded all interactions, maintained meticulous logs, and researched Oak Ridge Estate's history. What I discovered was troubling. Over the past 3 years, 7 homeowners had sold their properties significantly below market value after prolonged compliance disputes with the HOA. In each case, the properties were quickly renovated and resold at substantial profits by Oak Ridge Investment Partners, a company where Diane Mercer served as managing director. More concerning were the demographics of those who'd been forced out. An elderly widow, a deployed service member's family, a single mother, a retired teacher with medical issues. Vulnerable targets who lacked resources to fight back. My training recognized the pattern immediately. Systematic targeting of weaker community members through selective enforcement, followed by financial pressure until capitulation. Classic predatory behavior, just wrapped in suburban respectability. I decided to proceed carefully, documenting everything while revealing nothing about my professional background. If this was the organized scheme it appeared to be, it deserved proper investigation. The HOA's intimidation campaign escalated systematically. Within a week, My sprinkler system was sabotaged at 3 a.m., followed by a $350 water waste violation, fine by morning. Mail theft, mailbox vandalism, and waste service suspension quickly followed, each incident meticulously documented with my security equipment. The social isolation strategy was equally calculated. Neighbors who had been friendly now avoided me entirely, with one confessing not wanting trouble when confronted. Meanwhile, board members and relatives conducted late-night drive-bys with high beams, made anonymous 2 a.m. calls from burner phones, and, most alarmingly, installed directional microphones aimed at my property, a clear federal crime. Still, I maintained my cover. Strategic patience was my professional specialty, and I recognized the pattern. Escalating pressure designed to force compliance or property sale. Each incident was meticulously documented, time-stamped, and added to my growing case file. For weeks after moving in, I received an official-looking document titled Final Notice of Compliance. It claimed accumulated violations totaling $4,750 in fines and threatened a property lien if not paid within 72 hours. The document bore county letterhead, but my trained eye spotted inconsistencies in the formatting and signature. A quick call to my county contact confirmed my suspicion. The document was a sophisticated forgery of official government correspondence, another federal offense. Rather than exposing my knowledge, I responded with a simple certified letter from my attorney requesting validation of the debt and documentation of HOA jurisdiction over my property. This triggered an unexpected reaction. That evening, Diane called an emergency board meeting at her home. My directional microphone, legally deployed from my property for counter-surveillance, captured their conversation. Reynolds is becoming problematic, Diane told the gathered board members. His attorney is asking questions about our authority. We need to accelerate the process. A male voice objected. Maybe we should just skip this one. There are easier targets in phase 2. Diane's response was chilling. No exceptions. Everyone complies or everyone sees the consequences. That's how we maintain control. Besides, his corner lot is perfect for the duplex development once we acquire it. What about legal exposure? Another voice asked. My brother handles the legal angles, Diane assured them. Trust me, by next month, Reynolds will be begging to sell at our price point. Nobody challenges the HOA and wins. Nobody. The following day, I noticed something troubling. Martha, my elderly neighbor, was crying on her porch. When I approached to check on her, she initially seemed frightened. I shouldn't be talking to you, she whispered. They said you're trouble. With gentle reassurance, Martha revealed that Diane had threatened her with daily fines for her late husband's memorial rose garden being 3 inches above regulation height. She said if I can't pay the $6,000 in accumulated fines, I should consider their compassionate buyout program. The offer was less than half the home's market value. Martha, living on a fixed income, couldn't fight back. You're not the first, she admitted. The Johnsons lost their home last year after similar threats. The Williamses before them. Always the same pattern. That evening, a brick shattered my living room window with a note attached. Last warning. Rather than calling local police, I documented the evidence myself using FBI protocols. The brick, note, and glass fragments were carefully preserved for forensic analysis. My cameras had captured a board member's teenage son throwing the brick before running to a car where Diane waited in the driver's seat. All of this, the forged documents, recorded threats, physical vandalism, and coordinated harassment, formed a pattern that went far beyond aggressive HOA enforcement. This was organized criminal activity using Homeowners Association authority as cover. Instead of confronting them directly, I contacted my former FBI supervisor. Within 48 hours, an unofficial investigation began, with agents posing as potential homebuyers in adjacent neighborhoods to gather intelligence on the operation. What they discovered was alarming. Diane's operation wasn't limited to our neighborhood. Similar patterns had emerged in 3 nearby communities where she had connections to board members. In each case, the same tactics were employed. Infiltrate HOA leadership, modify bylaws to expand enforcement powers, target vulnerable residents, and acquire properties through distress sales. The agent's preliminary research uncovered something even more disturbing. County planning documents showed pending approval for commercial rezoning in areas where Diane's investment group had been acquiring homes. The potential profit wasn't just from flipping houses, it was from converting residential properties to commercial use, multiplying their value. My corner lot was particularly valuable because it sat at the potential entrance to a planned shopping center. This wasn't just predatory, it was a sophisticated real estate conspiracy with millions at stake. As the evidence mounted, federal authorities prepared to move. All they needed was one clear, documented criminal act that could trigger jurisdiction. Given Diane's cautious approach and careful use of proxies for most activities, they needed her to commit an unambiguous crime herself. I didn't have to wait long. Saturday morning, 9:17 a.m., my security system alerted me to movement in my driveway. On the feed, I watched Diane march purposefully toward my garage. Unlike her usual polished appearance in business attire, today she wore a gray blazer over jeans, formal enough to project authority but casual enough for weekend enforcement. The red spray can clutched in her right hand caught the morning sunlight. I activated all recording devices and continued watching the feed as she approached my garage door. "Make sure you get this," she instructed a board member filming with his phone. "This is what happens when people think rules don't apply to them." With deliberate, sweeping motions, she sprayed "We warned you" across my white garage door in foot-high crimson letters. The paint dripped down like blood, exactly the intimidation visual she intended. I stepped outside and assumed a position directly facing her, arms firmly crossed against my chest. My stance was solid, unmoving, and deliberately intimidating. The same posture I'd used confronting corruption suspects across 2 decades of federal service. Diane turned toward me, spray can still held conspicuously in her hand, red paint on her fingers. 3 neighbors watched from their driveways across the street. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked, my voice calm but carrying across the sudden silence of the neighborhood. Instead of showing shame at being caught, her expression hardened. She gestured wildly with her free hand, pointing at my garage. "Enforcing the rules you've repeatedly ignored," she shouted, her voice echoing down the street. "This is what happens when you defy the HOA." She stepped closer, spray can still grip tightly. "You've been warned multiple times about your violations and refusal to join. This is the consequence." I remained perfectly still, arms crossed, expression unflinching. My military-trained stillness contrasted sharply with her emotional display. "So vandalizing my property is HOA-approved behavior?" I asked, voice level. "This isn't vandalism," she snapped, gesturing to the dripping red letters. "This is authorized enforcement with board approval." She pointed to the board member recording the confrontation. "You have until Monday to pay your fines and submit your HOA application, or we take more serious action." The neighbors watching were visibly uncomfortable but remained silent, conditioned by months or years of similar intimidation. "And if I provide documentation proving my property is legally exempt from HOA governance?" I asked, maintaining my crossed-arm stance. She laughed dismissively. "Documentation can be changed. My brother works at the county clerk's office. We've handled exemption misunderstandings before." Her casual admission of manipulating public records was exactly what I needed. Without uncrossing my arms or breaking eye contact, I pressed the emergency contact button on my phone in my pocket, a prearranged signal to the surveillance team. "You seem quite confident in your position, Diane," I observed, still not moving from my confrontational stance. "Absolutely," she declared, stepping even closer, spray can raised slightly. "The Oak Ridge Estates HOA has complete authority here. The courts always side with HOAs against individual homeowners. Always. Your options are simple. Comply or suffer the consequences." The standoff was exactly like the scene playing out in my security feeds. A formally dressed woman holding a spray can, gesturing angrily at a calm man with crossed arms, with "We warned you" freshly painted on the garage behind them. "That's quite a threat," I replied, still motionless. and an impressively detailed admission of organized harassment. Her expression faltered slightly as unmarked vehicles silently pulled up behind her. 6 agents in FBI windbreakers approached, led by Assistant Director Wilson, my former partner on the Public Corruption Task Force. "Agent Reynolds," he acknowledged professionally. "Situation as described?" Diane's expression transformed from confidence to confusion. "Agent." I removed my credentials from my pocket, the gold badge catching the morning sunlight. "Special Agent James Reynolds, FBI Supervisory Special Agent, Public Corruption and Civil Rights Division. Currently on sabbatical to write the Bureau's new manual on identifying organized harassment campaigns." The color drained from her face as I continued. "You've just been recorded engaging in criminal vandalism, admitting to manipulation of public records, and describing a pattern of organized harassment, all federal offenses when crossing property lines." "This is absurd," she stammered, dropping the spray can. "It's just HOA business." Agent Wilson interjected. "Actually, Ms. Mercer, we've been investigating patterns of predatory HOA practices across 5 counties. Your name has appeared in 3 separate case files." As agents secured the scene and collected evidence, including the spray can for fingerprinting, Diane's composure completely collapsed. "Everything we did was legal," she protested. "HOAs have enforcement rights. HOAs have clearly defined legal authorities," I corrected. "They don't include forgery of government documents, surveillance using directional microphones, mail tampering, or property vandalism, all of which have been documented over the past month." Agent Wilson approached with Diane's confiscated phone. "Sir, initial review shows text messages coordinating similar actions against 7 other homeowners in the area, including Martha Wilson, the 78-year-old widow next door." That's when Diane's calculated facade finally shattered completely. They were breaking the rules. Property values were at risk. I was protecting our investment. "No," I replied quietly. "You were running a real estate acquisition scheme through intimidation and fraud. There's a significant legal difference." As agents led Diane and the board members to separate vehicles for questioning, neighbors emerged from their homes, watching in stunned silence. The public power display she'd orchestrated had become her public undoing. The FBI investigation uncovered a criminal enterprise far more sophisticated than typical HOA overreach. In Diane's home office, agents discovered the operations command center, a detailed neighborhood map with targeted properties highlighted in red, including my priority acquisition corner lot. The attached spreadsheet coldly noted potential zoning variance for multi-unit development, estimated profit $1.2 million after conversion. Her organization operated with corporate efficiency. Forensic accountants traced HOA funds being funneled to family-owned shell companies that charged inflated rates for substandard services. More disturbing was her methodical predatory approach. Internal documents revealed a formal category, a classification specifically targeting elderly residents, deployed military families, medical hardship cases, and recent widows who lacked resources to fight back. Once these vulnerable homeowners were forced out through orchestrated harassment, Diane's Oak Ridge Investment Group acquired their properties at 30 to 40% below market value, made cosmetic renovations, and flipped them for substantial profits, all enabled by forged documents and her brother's manipulation of county records. The scheme extended beyond just Oak Ridge. Similar operations were identified in 4 neighboring communities, each with the same pattern. Infiltrate HOA leadership, change bylaws to expand enforcement powers, target vulnerable residents, force distressed sales, and profit from redevelopment. When investigators interviewed the county clerk's office, they discovered Diane's brother had been manipulating property records to retroactively change exemption statuses, a significant break in the chain of title that affected dozens of homeowners. The corruption extended beyond Oak Ridge into local government. "This explains everything," my former supervisor said, showing me a financial trail revealing kickbacks to planning commission members who fast-tracked Diane's zoning variances, the same variances routinely denied to ordinary residents. The investigation's most chilling discovery was a 47-page manual in Diane's own handwriting titled Compliance Enforcement Strategies. One highlighted passage read, "Remember, Isolation is key. If they believe they're the only ones being targeted, they won't organize resistance. Always include some legitimate violation with the manufactured ones. It creates doubt about which is which. This wasn't impulsive overreach, it was calculated predation. Email records showed Diane had methodically studied real estate law not to enforce regulations properly, but specifically to identify and exploit vulnerabilities in HOA governance. One recovered email to a board member read, "Remember, isolation is key. If they believe they're the only ones being targeted, they won't organize resistance. Always include some legitimate violation with the manufactured ones. It creates doubt about which is which." As the investigation expanded, patterns emerged showing that Diane had been refining these tactics for over 7 years across different communities. She had started as a legitimate real estate investor before discovering that manipulation of HOA regulations offered a more profitable path with less market risk. The local news broke the story on Tuesday. By Wednesday, the FBI had established a dedicated hotline for affected homeowners. Within 48 hours, over 100 residents from 12 different communities had come forward with similar accounts of intimidation, falsified violations, and pressure to sell. The story went national when investigators discovered that similar schemes were operating in retirement communities across 5 states. What had begun as an investigation into a single act of vandalism had uncovered a nationwide pattern of predatory practices targeting America's most vulnerable homeowners. The neighborhood transformed overnight. Neighbors who had avoided me now approached with apologies and their own stories of intimidation. Martha, my 78-year-old widow neighbor, tearfully explained how Diane had threatened daily fines of $200 for her late husband's memorial rose garden being 3 inches above regulation height. When I couldn't pay, she offered to resolve everything if I sold her my house for half its appraised value. Tom, a Marine whose wife was deployed overseas, discovered he'd been paying HOA fees for 5 years despite his property being legally exempt, exactly like mine. They said my exemption paperwork was lost and threatened to put a lien on my house while my wife was in Afghanistan. I just paid to protect her from stress. Most residents had simply complied out of fear and isolation. Diane had masterfully prevented homeowners from communicating by spreading different rumors to different neighbors, creating an atmosphere of mistrust that prevented collective action. An impromptu community meeting formed in my backyard, the first time many neighbors had spoken honestly with each other in years. The stories shared revealed a pattern of divide-and-conquer tactics designed to isolate potential resistance. "She told me you all supported the stricter enforcement," Robert, a retired teacher, admitted. "She said if I opposed it, I'd be ostracized." Others nodded in recognition. They'd all received similar manipulative messages, tailored to their individual vulnerabilities. Together, we established the Homeowners Defense Coalition, starting with our neighborhood but quickly expanding to surrounding communities. Legal professionals volunteered services for affected homeowners. Security experts installed cameras for vulnerable residents. Former victims became community advocates. What had been a fragmented collection of isolated, intimidated homeowners transformed into a unified community with a shared purpose, reclaiming their neighborhood and ensuring such exploitation could never happen again. The case sparked investigations into HOA practices statewide. The Attorney General appointed a special task force to review regulations governing homeowners associations, resulting in the Homeowner Protection Act, landmark legislation establishing mandatory financial audits for all HOAs managing over $100,000, criminal penalties for predatory enforcement practices, strict limitations on fining powers and enforcement methods, transparent governance requirements, including recorded meeting, state oversight of HOA operations through a newly created regulatory division. I was asked to testify before the state legislature, sharing both my professional insights and personal experience. HOAs were originally created to maintain community standards, I explained to the committee, but without proper oversight, they can become vehicles for abuse of power, particularly targeting those least able to defend themselves. This isn't about legitimate community governance. It's about preventing the weaponization of neighborhood authority. The legislation passed with bipartisan support, creating a model that 5 other states would eventually adopt. Locally, the legitimate HOA was restructured with transparent governance, dramatically reduced fees, and strict limitations on enforcement powers. Financial decisions now required majority approval from all residents, not just board members. The focus shifted from punitive enforcement to genuine community improvement. My security camera network was repurposed into a neighborhood watch system, protecting residents rather than monitoring them for violations. What had been tools of intimidation became instruments of community safety. 6 months after the spray painting incident, Diane and 3 board members faced multiple federal charges including mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and racketeering under the RICO Act. The evidence was overwhelming. During the trial, the prosecution revealed the full scope of the scheme, including documented harassment of 17 vulnerable homeowners and more than $3.7 million in fraudulent profits from distressed property acquisitions. The courtroom was packed with affected homeowners, many of whom testified about their experiences. Martha, now recovering her financial security, described how she'd nearly lost her home of 40 years. Tom, the Marine whose wife had returned from deployment, detailed how the stress of HOA harassment had affected their marriage and children. Most powerful was the testimony of Eleanor Simmons, an 81-year-old former schoolteacher who had lost her home to Diane's scheme the previous year. "I taught children about American justice for 42 years, she told the hushed courtroom. "I almost lost faith in those lessons until this case." Rather than risk a jury trial, Diane accepted a plea agreement including 5 years in federal prison, full restitution to all affected homeowners, forfeiture of all properties acquired through the scheme, lifetime ban from serving in any HOA or property management capacity. The judge, a former victim of similar HOA abuses, added a unique requirement: 1,000 hours of community service maintaining the very properties she had cited for violations, wearing a vest clearly identifying her as serving. Court-ordered restitution. "The punishment should reflect the public nature of the humiliation you inflicted on others," the judge explained. "Just as you sought to publicly shame homeowners like Agent Reynolds, your rehabilitation will occur in full view of the community you exploited." During sentencing, Diane finally showed remorse. "I started with legitimate intentions," she told the court. "I wanted to protect property values. But power corrupts, and I became what I claimed to be fighting against." The judge was unmoved. "You didn't merely overstep your authority," he responded. "You constructed an elaborate criminal enterprise specifically designed to target the most vulnerable members of your community. That level of predatory behavior requires significant consequences." Diane's real estate license was revoked. Her brother was disbarred and faced separate charges for tampering with public records. The remaining board members received probation and community service after cooperating with investigators. The County Planning Commission was dissolved and reconstituted under state oversight after the corruption was exposed. 2 commissioners faced criminal charges for accepting bribes related to zoning variances. Most satisfying was watching the prosecutor display my garage door, preserved as evidence, during the sentencing hearing. This single act of vandalism, the prosecutor explained, committed from a position of perceived untouchable authority, exposed a criminal enterprise that had operated unchecked for years. Ms. Mercer believed that spraying "We warned you" would intimidate another victim into submission. Instead, it became the catalyst for dismantling her entire operation. As Diane was led from the courtroom, she paused beside me. "You could have just joined the HOA," she said quietly. "And you could have just been honest," I replied. The true victory wasn't Diane's imprisonment or the financial restitution. It was watching Martha reclaim her rose garden, seeing Tom's family reunited without fear, and helping Eleanor Simmons move back into the home she'd nearly lost. The system had worked as intended, protecting those it was designed to serve. 1 year later, Oak Ridge Estates had transformed from a neighborhood ruled by fear to a genuine community built on mutual support. The once intimidating HOA office was converted into a community center offering services for elderly residents and after-school programs for children. The punitive fine system was replaced with a voluntary improvement fund supporting neighborhood projects. Properties that had been acquired through intimidation were returned to their original owners when possible, or sold at fair market value with proceeds funding restitution. Most importantly, neighbors now looked out for each other instead of reporting each other. The same communication channels once used to spread division now coordinated meal deliveries for sick residents, yard care for deployed service members' families, and community improvement projects. I never planned to become the neighborhood's defender, but as I explained to a national news program doing a feature on HOA reform, the abuse of power should be challenged wherever it exists, whether in government offices or suburban neighborhoods. The principles of justice don't change with scale. As for me, I finally got to enjoy my retirement home, now surrounded by friends instead of fearful neighbors. That red spray paint changed everything, not just for me, but for homeowners across the country facing similar intimidation. Sometimes, standing firm against injustice protects more than just your property. It defends an entire community from exploitation. Sometimes the most important battles for justice happen right in your own driveway. My red spray-painted garage door now hangs in the county courthouse, a reminder that abusers of power, whether in government offices or HOA boardrooms, eventually meet their match. The next time someone tries to intimidate you with "we warned you," make sure they understand exactly who they're warning.